most common metric is day one retention. It's your first signal, or one of the first signals that helps you identify if that's a good source or not. And in my opinion, it's better when the retention number is conservative. And because the absolute is always higher than relative, I would always pick relative retention. Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Tenjin ROI 101. This is Roman, and today I'm joined by Jazz from our product team.
Hey guys, I am Jazz, or Jaspreet, but everyone likes to call me Jazz. I'm a senior product manager at Tenjin, and I'm happy to be here today, Roman.
And it is an exciting topic. We'll talk about absolute and relative cohorts, or absolute and relative retention. Most of the mobile publishers don't know the difference. They see a retention and they assume they know what it is. But there is a huge difference. And once you know the difference, you do much smarter business decisions, whether it's publishing, user acquisition, or just analytics. Let's just jump into it. We've prepared some beautiful slides. Towards the end, Jess will also show us how it works in Tenjin. So here is an absolute cohort. Jess, you want to take a step of what it is?
Sure. Absolute cohort, or you can call it a calendar date cohort. So before I go into that, I can talk a little bit about what a cohort is. So when we talk about cohort, especially at Tenjin, we mean when a user installs the app. And then we build cohorts based on that. Now, when we say absolute cohort, we say when did a user install the app? And by absolute, we mean calendar date. And in our Tenjin terminology, we use UTC time zone right now. So let me give you an example. So let's say that your UTC time ends at 7 p.m. local time, as an example. And if a user in your app installs the app before 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., then they are day zero, or when they do it after that, they will be day zero will start after 7 p.m. And then this changes, the retention also a little bit. So the way retention changes here is when the user comes back. So let's say the user installed the app on 6 p.m. So they became a day zero user, and then they come back at 8 p.m. So their retention, they're a retained user on day one. So I just talked a lot about that, but in simpler terms, absolute is just a description for the way we cohort, and the strategy we use there is just calendar date.
Yes, and as you can see here, like even if a user was acquired on a specific day, like let's say even 11:59, and he comes back 2 minutes later at 12:01, he'll be considered to be retained if we're talking about retention cohort, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this is sort of a false positive signal, whether you're doing analytics or you're doing UA, because I'm not sure if this user is really retained, right? He just came back in 2 minutes.
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. But sometimes if you want to do more of a calendar date analytics, and for other use cases that we can talk about later, then maybe using absolute cohort might make sense for your use case.
Yeah, absolutely. There are no like good or bad retention. There are different cases, right? And again, yeah, we have a slide for that too.
Yes.
And another one is a relative one.
Yeah, so I talked about what a cohort is, and it is basically an installation date That's what our cohorts are based off. And absolute is calendar date, while relative describes a 24-hour period. So when we say relative, it means relative to their installation date. So let's say, Roman, you install an app, right? So you install an app on, I don't know, at 2 p.m. Your time. So it doesn't matter if it is a UTC time zone or US New York time zone. It is relative to your installation time. So that's what we mean by relative, and it is 24 hours. So what we mean by that is you install the app at 1 p.m. and then you need to come back, in 24 hours to be called as a retained user. So that's the core difference between what a relative cohort is versus an absolute cohort where we use a UTC time zone.
Makes sense. Now let's see the different use cases, right? So for the relative, I can start just based on my experience in UA. The most common metric is day one retention. It's your first signal, or one of the first signals that helps you identify if that's a good source or not. And in my opinion, it's better when the retention number is conservative. And because the absolute is always higher than relative, I would always pick relative retention. So
Yeah,
that's the tip. Yeah.
I agree with that. If you want to analyze your users, and if you want to run campaigns and do a lot of like user based cohort analysis, and you want, minimum disruptions from different time zones, so using relative retention will give you the best answers to how your users are performing and how your campaigns are working. So I agree with that.
Now to the comparing with analytics providers. And full, like I think the disclaimer here is that we're using this terminology, absolute versus relative, but other analytics providers might use different labels for that, basically. So my advice is always to check what sort of methodology they use before you compare the data,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And based on our research, we've seen that most of the analytics providers, so for example, Firebase, is using absolute retention, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, you just, once you know that, you just save yourself a lot of time when you start comparing the data between Firebase and Tenjin, or Firebase or
Yeah.
any other MMP, for example, right?
100%. So that's the biggest use case also of one of the biggest use cases of using absolute cohort strategy. If your use case is to compare different analytics provider or different, data systems in general, so using the absolute cohort strategy will be the best for you because it will give you similar results and you can have a comparison. Because a lot of these analytics providers work on a calendar date like analytics side of thing. They care more about calendar date numbers, which is why if your use case is to compare, different providers, then yes, absolutely use absolute cohort.
And the third use case is when you're working with publisher, make sure that you know what type of retention they use, and make sure that you are reporting on the like retention that is basically like higher, right? It's in your interest, and that's, again, absolute is always higher than relative retention. I've seen so many cases when developer starts working with a publisher, and then they see that the numbers are different and they have no idea what it is, and they think there is some like technical issue with it. But in reality, it's a different methodology again, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think the first, the initial days of your campaigns or the initial cohorts, relative is lower, right, than absolute.
Yes.
So, but as you go over time, the numbers sort of will match like your
Yeah.
more older cohorts. But yeah, Roman, I do agree with you.
Yeah.
You need to know that for
Yeah.
sure.
Very good point. So this is mostly, again, guys, day one retention. Day seven, it's gonna be kind of the same, but you want to find the best users as soon as possible and spend as little money as possible on not so good users. So this is
Yep.
why we think it's important, and this is why we're doing this
Yeah.
video, basically.
Yeah, and Roman, and we know what our users want, right? Like we know our users have different use cases for running their campaigns, working with publishers, and comparing with different analytics providers, which is why we offer you both these retention cohorts or cohort strategies that you can basically toggle on our dash.
Show us, Jess.
Yes, I will.
I'll stop sharing while just preparing to share the screen. Give us a like if you learned something new today. Leave us a comment if you have any comments about these things or you want us to cover more topics like that. And subscribe for the next episodes. I see.
You see it?
Cool.
Awesome.
Yep.
So this is our demo account, and this is our beautiful dash. You can go under My Account. You can go under Manage User. So remember, the cohort strategy is, for your user. So it's a preference that is set at the user level. So it's not an org level setting. So every user can pick their own strategy. And again, like Roman said, these are different use cases, right? Maybe a UA manager wants to use relative. Maybe a dev wants to use um, absolute or UTC that we call. So you can pick your own toggle on our dash for your own user. And it's very simple. You pick cohort strategy, you pick relative or use UTC. So relative is the 24 hours that I talked about. UTC is just absolute. And then you can read, all the cool details that describes the differences between relative and UTC time zones. And then you just hit update and all done. And then you just go back to your reports, and everything will now, all your cohorts, not just retention but ROI, LTV, ROAS, all your cohorts will now use the cohort strategy that you picked under My User.
Yeah, and the coolest thing, and I was kind of surprised that it all calculates on the fly. So switch absolute one numbers, switch back other numbers, nothing is lost. You can always find the best approach and don't lose the data
Yeah.
and have something for yourself.
And you see, Roman, how fast this was. This
Mm.
is, and I do want to talk a little bit about this. This is because of our really cool tech team. And I don't know if the users who are watching this, they probably have seen amazing improvements on how fast our dash has become, and that's because of this re-architecture that we did a while ago that leverages ClickHouse. And we are dynamically generating queries, with aggregated tables that are immutable, and then they are able to pick different strategies and run different queries on the fly. So it is super super fast, and with very minimal changes. So we were able to make this change happen with like some really cool innovative re-architecture that we did with our tech systems.
And the features are so easy to release now. Like our December newsletter, like if you're not subscribed, subscribe. But it had so many new features.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, with this, we help made your cohort strategy simple.
Yeah, that's a good end for this episode. We have another video about the retention. We invited like a game designer, and he explained everything that you need to know about the retention in general. We'll link it somewhere here in this video so you can drill down into this rabbit hole of retention if you want. Thanks a lot, Jess.
Thank you, Roman, for
Yep.
having me.
Have a good one. Cheers.
You too. Bye. Bye, guys.